Hey everyone, big thanks to LitRPG Reads and to Paul Bello Finefellow. We're diving into your request for a deep dive on balancing NPC allies in D&D combat, managing additional forces. You know, this article really hit home for me. It reminded me of this one time I was running a game, and my players were facing off against this massive fire-breathing dragon. We were doing okay, but they were definitely on the ropes. So I decided to introduce an NPC knight who owed the party a life debt. I thought it'd be this epic moment, you know? The knight charges in, saves the day, maybe even sacrifices himself heroically. Well, let's just say my carefully crafted encounter went up in smoke. This knight, with his super optimized stats and magic gear, basically soloed the dragon. My players just sat there, jaws on the floor, while their supposed allies stole all the glory. It was a disaster. That's when I realized that managing NPC allies is a delicate balancing act. You want them to be helpful and engaging, but not to the point where they overshadow the players or derail your carefully planned encounters. So let's crack open this article and see what nuggets of wisdom we can unearth. And hey, if you've ever had a similar experience with an overzealous NPC, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your war stories.
What's fascinating about this article is that it starts with the basics combat roles. It reminds us that just like player characters, NPCs should have clear roles in combat. Are they damage dealers, defenders, or support? And more importantly, are they filling a gap in the party's capabilities? For example, you mentioned your party had a hard time with a fire-breathing dragon. What if instead of a powerhouse knight, you'd introduced a skilled NPC mage who specialized in ice magic? Not only would they have provided a tactical advantage against the dragon's fiery breath, but they also wouldn't have outshined the party's own abilities. It's about creating synergy, not overshadowing.
That's such a good point. It's not about just throwing in random NPCs, but strategically choosing allies who complement the party's strengths and weaknesses. I could have totally used an ice mage in that dragon fight. But combat roles are just the tip of the iceberg, right? What about tactical positioning? I mean, where you place your NPCs on the battlefield can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. The article emphasizes that an NPC's position should be determined by their role and abilities. Take your archer example. Imagine if instead of having them stand in the back with the rest of the ranged attackers, you'd position them on a nearby rooftop. They'd have a clear line of sight to the enemies, and their attacks would be much more effective. They could even provide cover fire for the party's melee fighters, adding a whole new dimension to the combat.
Okay, I'm seeing the light here. It's not just about what your NPCs can do, but how and where they do it. Suddenly, I'm picturing all sorts of cinematic moments. A rogue flanking the enemy while their NPC archer pins them down. A wizard unleashing a spell while their NPC bodyguard holds the line against a horde of goblins. It's like those epic battle scenes from movies, but in our tabletop games.
Exactly. And this brings us to another crucial point: action economy. We want our NPC allies to be active participants in combat, but we also don't want them bogging down the pace with a ton of actions. Remember that time your knight single-handedly took down the dragon? That's a prime example of an NPC hogging the spotlight.
Ugh, don't remind me. But how do you find that balance? How do you make sure your NPCs are contributing without stealing the show? I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm playing chess with myself, trying to figure all these extra moves.
One technique the article suggests is to simplify your NPCs' actions. Instead of giving them a full suite of abilities, focus on one or two key actions that they can perform effectively. This not only streamlines combat, but also makes your NPCs more memorable. Think of it this way. You remember Aragorn in Lord of the Rings for his swordsmanship? Gandalf for his magic. You don't need them to be masters of every skill to be impactful.
That's a brilliant analogy. Keep the NPCs focused, make them masters of their niche. So an NPC fighter might have a single devastating attack, while an NPC rogue could be a master of disabling traps.
Precisely. This approach keeps the action flowing smoothly and allows your players to shine. And as a bonus, it makes running those NPCs much easier on you as the DM.
Less bookkeeping, more storytelling. I can definitely get behind that. But let's be real. Even with streamlined actions, NPCs can still become overpowered if you're not careful, especially as the party levels up. Speaking of which, how do you handle power scaling for NPCs?
That's a great question, and one the article delves into quite thoughtfully. It suggests that instead of leveling up NPCs in lockstep with the party, consider giving them a set of unique abilities that improve over time. These abilities could be tied to their backstory, their relationship with the party, or even their personal goals. For example, that NPC knight who overshadowed your party. Imagine if instead of gaining levels, he'd earned a magical blessing that allowed him to shield the party from harm once per encounter.
Ooh, I like that. It makes him powerful, but in a way that directly supports the party instead of outshining them. Plus, it adds a cool narrative element to his character.
Exactly. It turns power scaling from a purely mechanical exercise into an opportunity for storytelling and character development.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense. But let's say we've nailed the combat roles, the positioning, the action economy, and even the power scaling. What about resource management? I mean, our NPC allies shouldn't have infinite spell slots or an endless supply of magic arrows, right?
You're absolutely right. Limiting resources is crucial for maintaining balance and adding a layer of strategic decision-making to the game. Remember, your players have to carefully manage their own resources, so it only makes sense that their NPC allies should face similar constraints.
So how do we implement that? Do we track every single arrow an NPC archer fires or every spell slot an NPC wizard uses? That seems like a lot of extra work.
The article actually suggests a more streamlined approach. Abstracting resource management. Instead of tracking individual resources, give your NPCs a limited pool of resources they can use each day. For example, an NPC cleric might have a pool of healing dice they can use to heal the party. Once those dice are gone, they have to rely on other methods like potions or bandages.
It's a great idea. It simplifies things for the DM and creates interesting choices for both the players and the NPCs. Does the cleric burn through their healing dice early on, risking being depleted later in the day? Or do they conserve their resources knowing that a tougher challenge might lie ahead?
Precisely. It introduces an element of risk and reward that makes the game more engaging for everyone involved.
Resource management check. This is fantastic. But there's another layer to NPC allies that I've always found tricky: loyalty. I mean, these aren't mindless automatons. They have their own motivations, beliefs, and even doubts.
Ah, yes, loyalty. This is where things get really interesting. The article emphasizes that loyalty should be a dynamic element of your game, something that can be earned and lost through the party's actions and choices.
Because in the real world, alliances are rarely black and white. People have their own agendas, their own values. So how do we translate that complexity into our games?
The article suggests a few different approaches. One is to give each NPC a loyalty score, which can be influenced by the party's interactions with them. Kindness, respect, and shared experiences might increase loyalty, while betrayal, deception, or disregard for the NPC's values could lower it.
So it's like a reputation system, but specifically for NPC allies. I like that. It creates a sense of consequence for the party's actions. You can't just treat your NPC allies like hired muscle and expect them to stay loyal forever.
Exactly. It encourages the players to think about the impact of their choices, not just on themselves, but on the people around them, and it can lead to some truly memorable moments of role-playing and character interaction.
I'm imagining this scene where the party has to make a tough decision, one that goes against the morals of their loyal NPC companion. Do they try to convince the NPC to see things their way? Do they risk losing their loyalty by forging ahead with their plan? It's a recipe for dramatic tension and moral dilemmas.
And that's the beauty of a well-crafted loyalty system. It injects a dose of realism into your game, reminding everyone that even the strongest bonds can be tested.
Okay, so we've tackled combat roles, positioning, action economy, power scaling, resource management, and even loyalty. I'm exhausted. But I have a feeling we're not done yet, right? What other nuggets of wisdom does this article hold?
Well, we've covered how NPCs act in combat, but the article also delves into a crucial aspect that many DMs overlook: morale. Even the bravest warriors can experience fear and doubt, especially when facing overwhelming odds.
Morale. That's so important. And yet it's something I often forget to incorporate into my games. I mean, I've described my players' characters feeling fear or hesitation, but I rarely do the same for my NPCs. It's like they're immune to the psychological effects of battle.
Right. But by incorporating morale into your game, you can create a more immersive and realistic experience. The article suggests a simple system where NPCs have a morale score that can be affected by various factors, such as taking damage, witnessing the death of a comrade, or facing a particularly terrifying foe.
So it's like a hidden stat that represents their mental fortitude.
Exactly. As their morale drops, they might become less effective in combat, they might hesitate to attack, flee from danger, or even turn on their allies in a moment of panic.
Whoa! That's intense. And it adds a whole new layer of unpredictability to combat. You never know when an NPC might crack under pressure.
Precisely. And it gives the players an opportunity to use their skills and abilities to bolster the morale of their allies. Imagine the party's bard inspiring their flagging companions with a rousing song, or the paladin rallying their troops with a stirring speech.
Suddenly, those social skills and charisma scores become even more valuable in combat. It's not just about hitting things with swords anymore, but about supporting your allies and keeping their spirits up.
Exactly, and it makes the NPCs feel more like real people with their own fears and vulnerabilities.
Okay, morale check. This article is a goldmine of great ideas, but I have to ask, what happens when, despite our best efforts to manage them, an NPC bites the dust? Do they stay dead? Are there resurrection options? Do we just quietly retire them from the campaign?
That's a great question, and one that touches on a fundamental aspect of D&D, the permanence of death. The article doesn't prescribe a specific approach, but it does encourage DMs to consider the narrative and thematic implications of NPC death.
So it's not just about mechanically resolving the situation, but about thinking about how the death of an NPC affects the story, the party, and the world as a whole.
Exactly. Does the world have readily available resurrection magic? Are there powerful healers or divine beings who might intervene? Or is death a more permanent affair, something that carries weight and consequence?
I'm suddenly realizing that NPC death can be just as impactful as player character death, if not more so. It can be a major turning point in the story, a catalyst for revenge, or even a source of profound grief for the party.
Precisely. And it can raise all sorts of interesting questions about the nature of mortality, the value of life, and the bonds between companions.
Wow, we've covered so much ground already, from combat tactics to emotional depth. But there's one more piece of the puzzle that I'm curious about: player control. How much control should players have over their NPC allies? Is it free-for-all, or should there be some limits?
That's a question that has plagued DMs since the dawn of tabletop RPGs, and the article offers some insightful perspectives on this age-old dilemma. It emphasizes that finding the right balance between player agency and NPC autonomy is key to a satisfying and engaging experience.
So it's not about giving players complete control over every single action an NPC takes.
Not necessarily. While some players might enjoy micromanaging every detail, others might prefer a more hands-off approach. The article suggests a system where players can give general orders to their NPCs, like protect the healer or focus fire on that enemy. But ultimately, the NPCs retain a degree of autonomy in how they carry out those orders.
That makes sense. It gives players a sense of influence without bogging them down in the minutiae of every single action. And it allows the NPCs to showcase their personalities and expertise, making them feel like true partners rather than mindless puppets.
Exactly. It's about striking that balance between collaboration and individual agency, allowing both the players and the NPCs to contribute to the story in meaningful ways.
Okay, I think my brain is officially full. We've covered so much ground, from combat roles to player control, and I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of how to manage NPC allies effectively. What are your final thoughts on this epic deep dive?
Well, I think the key takeaway from this article is that NPC allies are more than just stat blocks or convenient plot devices. They're opportunities to enrich your game with compelling characters, dynamic relationships, and unforgettable moments of storytelling.
Beautifully said. It's about seeing them as integral parts of the world, not just tools to be used and discarded.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that when done right, NPC allies can elevate your game to a whole new level of depth, excitement, and emotional resonance. You know, one thing that really struck me in the article was how much emphasis it placed on communication. It's not just about giving orders to your NPCs, it's about creating a system where the players and the NPCs can communicate effectively even in the heat of battle. The article suggested using nonverbal cues like hand gestures or subtle shifts in positioning. Imagine a party exploring a darkened dungeon relying on stealth to avoid detection. A system of prearranged hand signals could allow the players to direct their NPC rogue without breaking the silence, adding a whole new layer of tension and immersion to the scene.
Ooh, I love that idea. It's like something out of a spy thriller, where every movement, every glance carries a hidden meaning. It makes the players think carefully about how they communicate, adding a strategic element to even the simplest interactions. Plus, it's a nice change of pace from just shouting commands across the table. But what about situations where more direct communication is needed? Like, say the party is in the middle of a chaotic battle and they need to coordinate a complex strategy with their NPC allies. Whispering might not cut it.
For those situations, the article suggests exploring magical means of communication. Think telepathic links, enchanted communication stones, or even something as simple as a shared code phrase whispered in hushed tones. These magical communication methods add a cool, fantastical element to the game, too. Plus, they open up all sorts of possibilities for intrigue and deception. What if the party's communication is intercepted by an enemy spellcaster? Or what if an NPC is secretly working for the villain, feeding false information to the party through the telepathic link? The possibilities for drama and suspense are endless.
Whoa, that's awesome. Suddenly, I'm picturing this tense scene where the party is trying to coordinate an attack on an enemy fortress. But they have to be careful because they suspect one of their NPC allies might be a traitor. It's like a D&D version of Among Us.
Okay.
I'm definitely adding magical communication to my next campaign. But this whole conversation about communication really highlights something important. Treating our NPC allies like actual characters, not just tools or extensions of the player's will. They have their own personalities, their own motivations, their own ways of interacting with the world.
Precisely. And that's why the article also emphasizes the importance of social integration. It's about making sure your NPCs are active participants in the story, not just background figures who show up for combat and then vanish into the ether. It starts with giving them rich backstories and personalities. Connect them to the world. Give them relationships, goals, secrets. Make them feel real.
So instead of just saying, okay, you meet a helpful blacksmith who can repair your armor, we dig a little deeper. We give that blacksmith a name, a history, a family. Maybe they're a former adventurer themselves, or maybe they have a long-standing feud with the local thieves guild. Suddenly, they're not just a quest giver or a source of information. They're a character with their own story to tell a story that can intertwine with the party's adventures in unexpected and exciting ways. It's like those side characters in our favorite fantasy novels, the ones who steal the show, even though they're not the main protagonist.
Exactly. And that story can extend beyond the typical tavern meet and greet or quest briefing. What about those downtime moments between adventures? Imagine the party spending an evening at the local tavern sharing stories and drinks with their NPC allies. Or maybe they invite their NPC friends to join them on a hunting trip or a festival celebration. It's all about creating those moments of shared experience, those opportunities for the players and NPCs to bond and grow closer.
I love those downtime moments. They're a chance to really flesh out the characters and let the players explore their relationships with the NPCs in a more relaxed setting. It's where those unexpected friendships and rivalries can blossom. Plus, it gives the players a chance to catch their breath before the next dungeon crawl or dragon fight. But let's be real, sometimes those epic campaign-defining moments are what we live for. The moments where the fate of the world hangs in the balance, where heroes rise and villains fall. Our NPC allies can play a crucial role in these moments too, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I'd argue that their role becomes even more important in those high-stakes situations. Think about those classic fantasy stories, the ones that have inspired countless D&D campaigns. You've got the brave knights fighting alongside their loyal squires, the powerful wizards mentored by wise archmages, the cunning rogues aided by their network of informants and allies. It's about creating those epic team-ups, those moments where the party and their NPC allies come together to face a common threat.
Okay, now I'm picturing this epic battle scene where the party is facing off against this seemingly unstoppable demon lord. And just when all hope seems lost, their NPC allies arrive. The rogue's mentor, a master thief, appears out of nowhere and disables a crucial trap. The paladin's loyal squire throws himself in front of deadly attack, saving his master's life. And the wizard's eccentric but brilliant mentor unleashes a spell that banishes the demon lord back to the abyss.
It's a scene straight out of a fantasy epic, and it's a scene that wouldn't be nearly as impactful without the presence of those NPC allies. Those characters who have fought alongside the party, shared their struggles, and earned their trust. It's a reminder that even the greatest heroes don't always stand alone. They have allies, companions, and mentors who support them, challenge them, and inspire them to reach their full potential. And that's what makes for a truly epic campaign.
Thinking back on all these amazing possibilities, it's clear that managing NPC allies is so much more than just adding a few extra stat blocks to your encounters. It's about creating characters who feel real, who have a place in the world, and who can contribute to the story in meaningful and memorable ways. It's about weaving them into the fabric of the campaign, making them feel like an integral part of the party's journey. And it's about giving them the space to shine, allowing them to demonstrate their skills, their personalities, and their loyalty.
Because when done right, NPC allies can transform a good campaign into a truly great one. And they can remind us that even in the most fantastical of worlds, the bonds of friendship, loyalty, and shared adventure are what truly matter.
Beautifully said. But before we get too sentimental, there's one final aspect of managing NPC allies that we need to address. And it's something that's often overlooked, but is absolutely crucial for maintaining fairness and balance in the game. It's all about how we handle experience points, treasure, and recognition. Because even our trusty NPC allies deserve a share of the loot and the glory, right? But how do we make sure everyone feels fairly compensated without overshadowing the player characters? That's a tricky balance to strike.
It certainly is. But luckily, the article gives us some great advice on how to approach this delicate issue. It all starts with recognizing that rewards come in many forms. Yes, there's experience points, which represent character growth and advancement, and there's treasure, which can include gold, magic items, and other valuable goods, but there's also the intangible reward of glory of recognition for one's deeds. And that's something that can be just as valuable as any material reward.
So how do we distribute these rewards fairly among the party and their NPC allies? The article suggests a few different approaches, each with its own pros and cons. Let's start with experience points. Should NPCs gain experience at the same rate as the player characters? Or should they receive a reduced share reflecting their supporting role in the adventure?
That's a great question, and there's no right or wrong answer. It really depends on the specific campaign and the role of the NPCs in the story. If you want the NPCs to level up alongside the party, keeping pace with their abilities and power, then awarding them full experience points might make sense. But if you prefer to keep the focus primarily on the player characters, you might opt for a reduced experience share for the NPCs. It's all about finding a system that works for your game and your players.
Makes sense. Now, what about treasure? Should the NPCs get an equal share of all the loot the party finds? Or should there be a system for dividing the spoils based on need contribution or some other factor?
Again, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But it's important to have a system in place, one that everyone understands and agrees to. Otherwise, you risk creating resentment or a sense of unfairness among the players or the NPCs. One approach is to prioritize gear based on roles. If a particularly powerful sword is found, it would make sense for the party's fighter or the NPC who fills that role to have first dibs.
That's a good point. It ensures that the treasure is being used, effectively enhancing the strengths of the party as a whole. And for those items that don't have a clear best fit, you could always use a simple random system like rolling dice or drawing straws to determine who gets the loot. That adds an element of chance and excitement to the treasure division process. But let's not forget about the glory. How do we make sure our NPC allies get the recognition they deserve for their contributions to the party's success?
This is where storytelling comes into play. As a game master, you have the power to highlight the NPCs' heroic deeds, their acts of courage, and their sacrifices. You can weave their stories into the larger narrative of the campaign, making them feel like integral parts of the world and its history. It's about making sure the NPCs' actions have meaning, that they're not just forgotten footnotes in the grand chronicles of the party's adventures.
I love that. It's about giving them their due. And it's about recognizing that sometimes the most valuable rewards aren't material possessions, but the respect, admiration, and gratitude of those they've fought alongside. Because in the end, that's what truly makes a hero, isn't it? The willingness to put oneself on the line for others, to fight for a cause greater than oneself, and to leave a legacy of courage and kindness in the world.
Well said. And that's a legacy that both player characters and their NPC allies can share. So there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the art of managing NPC allies, from combat tactics to social integration, from power scaling to reward distribution.
It's a complex topic, but one that's well worth exploring, because when done right, NPC allies can elevate our games to a whole new level of immersion excitement and storytelling potential. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to pose a question to our listeners. What's your biggest challenge when it comes to running NPC allies in your games? Is finding that sweet spot between giving them enough agency without overshadowing your players? Or maybe it's coming up with creative ways to integrate them into the story beyond just combat encounters.
Perhaps it's striking that balance between rewarding them fairly without making the player characters feel like they're taking a back seat.
Whatever your challenge may be, we want to hear about it. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts, your struggles, your triumphs, and your most memorable NPC ally stories. We might even feature some of your insights in a future episode. And, of course, a final nod to Paul Bello-Finefellow. Until next time, may your dice rolls be ever in your favor, and may your NPC allies always have your back.